The story I'm about to share happened about 3 years ago, and it still makes me wary of overly friendly strangers. I've always prided myself on being a flexible, talkative person who easily makes friends. But after this incident, I became distrustful and a bit obsessive over the smallest details. I've always been a fan of road trips. The feeling of freedom when hitting the road, with the wind in my face and the promise of new adventures, fascinated me. But after what happened that night, I think twice before trusting people. It was a long weekend, and I decided to take a trip to a small town. I had heard of a scenic route that passed through the desert, Route 66. It seemed like the perfect way to escape the stress of the city. The trip started well. The day was clear and the view was breathtaking. But as the sun began to set, the sky darkened with a slight fog rolling in. The road became narrower and more winding, so I turned on the car's headlights and kept driving. I was in an unfamiliar area, and the cell service was so bad that my GPS frequently told me to turn onto non-existent roads. I had no idea how long I'd been driving on that road. Frustrated with the technology's unreliability, I decided to resort to the old maps I kept in the car. For many years, they had been my only companions, and now would be no different. I still remember the sense of security I felt when I picked them up again. GPS was a great convenience, but nothing compared to the feeling of holding an unexplored map. From what I could tell, I was a few kilometers from a small town, just a few houses and a central square. I decided to head there and see if there was any place I could spend the night. It wasn't exactly where I intended to stay, but with the fog thickening, I felt it would be best to rest and start driving again before sunrise. That way, I could enjoy the view again. I hadn't yet reached the small town indicated on the map when I started feeling strange. The road was in such bad shape that it seemed unlikely to be close to a populated area. When I finally arrived in the village, I was genuinely shocked by what I saw. The fog helped paint a more depressing picture of the place, but it was still a terrible sight. The houses were extremely old, making me doubt if anyone lived there. I decided to check my phone and see if I had any signal. Surprisingly, I did. I searched for more information about the place. There was almost no information available, but one thing that caught my eye was the population number. 66. Exactly the same number as the road I had been on, Route 66. I decided to continue driving through the middle of the houses until I saw a sign for a cafe. It looked strange and shabby from the outside, but at least someone there could tell me if there was any place to stay. Upon entering, the decor made me uneasy. The walls were covered with hunting trophies, carcasses of long-dead animals, numerous guns, and knives hung on the walls. In the corner, I noticed a kind of altar with various bones and a skull that looked human. At that moment, I didn't think it was real. Just some eccentric who liked hunting and had decided to set up that bizarre altar. Even so, something inside me started to feel agitated. I had seen many places like that on my travels, especially in the more deserted parts of the country. But this one felt different. I just couldn't pinpoint why. I went to the counter and called out to see if anyone would appear. Until that moment, I hadn't seen a single soul. But that wasn't unusual. With such weather, people preferred to stay indoors, warm and comfortable. After calling out, a man appeared through one of the doors, wearing a big smile. I immediately felt more at ease. At least the place wasn't abandoned. I explained my situation and asked if there was anywhere I could spend the night. The man was very friendly, although something about him seemed off. As I told him my story, I saw a peculiar joy begin to simmer in his eyes. Perhaps he wasn't used to seeing outsiders, and this was an opportunity to hear about new adventures. I decided to ignore my initial unease and trust this affable and helpful man. After serving me a couple of whiskeys on the house and listening to some of my travel stories, he suggested that I follow a narrow road to find lodging. He asked for my permission to call a friend to check if there were any rooms available at his inn. This struck me as odd. In my research, I hadn't found any information about an inn, and it seemed strange that anyone besides me would choose to stop in that village. Another factor that made me slightly uncomfortable was that he didn't call his friend in front of me. Instead, he excused himself and left through the door he had originally entered. When he returned, he seemed even more excited, telling me that his friend still had a room and was preparing it immediately. I thanked him and decided to follow his advice to take the narrow road next to the cafe. The GPS suggested another route that would get me there faster, but since the man probably knew the area better, I decided to trust his directions. The road was extremely narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass except at a few intersections. It was dark and poorly maintained, flanked by barns and sheds. It felt as though the villagers preferred to live elsewhere, leaving this part of town to the fields and animals. The fog continued to thicken, so I pushed aside the strange feeling and felt grateful to have found someone willing to help me. I had been on the road for about 5 minutes when I noticed something ahead. It was difficult to make out in the darkness and fog, but as I got closer, I realized it was a car. A car facing me with the lights at full brightness. I decided to wait, assuming someone might have stopped to check on their animals or was still working nearby. The lights on just to illuminate the road, which was completely dark. After 2 minutes with no sign of anyone, I decided to get out of my car and inspect the other vehicle, maybe call out to see if anyone would respond. As I approached the car, I saw a man sitting in the driver's seat. He was staring at me with a wide grin on his face. "Are you all right?" The question slipped out before I had time to think. He continued to stare at me with that eerie, vacant smile, but didn't respond. Suddenly, I heard footsteps, and something inside me screamed that I was in danger. I sprinted back to my car and locked all the doors. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw a figure walking towards me, dragging something along the ground. The realization of who it was hit me like a truck. It was the man from the cafe, dragging a massive axe along the ground. Panic took over. What the hell was happening? The road ahead was blocked by the other car. My only option was to reverse. Without thinking twice, I slammed on the accelerator. The man lunged to the side, embedding his axe in my car. I reversed as quickly as I could back to the main road, my body and mind reacting purely on instinct. I sped back onto Route 66, driving through the night in a trance. I was certain I had narrowly escaped with my life. Only in the morning, after a night on the road, did I realize I hadn't called the police. I called them and reported everything that had happened. I found out later that the trophies hanging on the walls of that cafe and the skull I had seen were not just animal trophies or fake. Some were human, collected over many years. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to losing my life. If there's one piece of advice I can offer from this, it's to always trust your gut feelings. They might just save your life. And never underestimate the importance of security, especially when you're in unfamiliar territory. The story I'm about to share happened during my first year of college. My name is Antonio, and I was just a kid back then, never having ventured more than 30 kilometers from the area where I was born. Consequently, I believed the world was a place full of good people, always willing to help. Entering college, moving to a new state, and starting to interact with people I'd never met before was madness for me. You see, I had never left my small town in Texas, where people were simple and everyone knew each other. Needless to say, my social skills were almost non-existent, so whenever someone invited me to do something different, I accepted without a second thought. I remember that when I started college, I was super nervous, even considering whether it was worth subjecting myself to social stress. I could simply go back home and work at my father's shop, living the rest of my days in that peaceful place. But I wanted to see the world. I wanted adventure, and I'm glad I went to college. Not necessarily for what I learned, unfortunately. Our education system falls far short of expectations, but for the people I met. Me and my friends, we were nearing the end of our first year in college and felt we deserved a little vacation. We could have flown, but driving seemed much more appealing, so we decided that was what we wanted to do. The first days were incredible. We traveled at the end of each day and visited different towns. There were 4 of us: me, Tom, Caleb, and Oliver. The trip was planned to last 15 days, and the first 7 were fantastic. The freedom I felt at that time is something I've never been able to replicate since. On the 8th day, everything changed. It was late. We had been traveling for several hours, and Oliver, who was driving, was getting tired. In reality, we were all tired, but we still hadn't reached our next stop and had about 2 more hours to go. It was around midnight when we decided to stop at a gas station to rest a bit, use the restroom, and grab a coffee. The 4 of us were by the coffee machine when I mentioned I was going to the restroom. From what I could tell, the restroom and the coffee machine were in completely opposite areas, something that didn't make much sense. Even so, the walk would do me good to stretch my legs. We had been cooped up in that car for hours. As I headed to the restroom, I passed our car. I noticed that another car had parked very close to ours. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I saw a slight shadow at the front of the car. It was very dark, and I only had visual access to the rear, but I was sure I saw a shadow at the front. I hid behind a wall and watched. After a few minutes, I was about to give up and believe I had imagined everything when I saw a man get up from the front of the car, clearly trying not to be noticed and puncturing the rear tires. As if that wasn't alarming enough, he then walked over to some nearby bushes and hid there. At this point, my stress levels were through the roof. Every year there were stories of people being mistreated and killed in remote areas like this one. Instinctively, I started thinking of all possible escape routes. All of us had left our phones in the car. This gas station had no one working there. It was too small and isolated. And lastly, if I went back to my friends to warn them, the man would see me. At that moment, my only advantage was knowing something was going to happen, without the man knowing that at least one of us was aware. For him to hide in the bushes, he clearly wanted to create a moment of surprise. Completely panicked, I decided to go to the restroom, wash my face, and think about what to do next. Up to that moment, I hadn't considered the possibility of there being more than one man, nor the possibility of things getting even worse. But as I approached the restroom, still completely on alert, I heard a door close. In less than a second, I managed to hide and saw another man leave the restroom. He was huge and had some sort of pipe in his hand. What the hell was going on? I saw him walk towards the area where our cars were parked, then lost sight of him. At this point, it was clear something very bad was going to happen to us if I didn't keep a cool head and figure out a way to warn my friends. The only solution was to sneak past the gas station, keeping it completely under surveillance, and hope my friends were still in the same spot. I think I never ran so fast and so carefully as I did at that moment. And I still remember the immense relief I felt when I saw them. Cheerful and smiling, still in the same spot. When I told them everything I had seen, I thought they would doubt me, think I was joking. But as soon as they saw my face, they all realized it was no joke, and that we needed to think quickly about what to do next, or we'd be national news the next day. We considered confronting them, but we didn't know if there were only 2 of them. I had only seen 2, but there could be more. Even if there were just 2, we were completely defenseless and had no way to leave in our own car. All the tires had been punctured, and the first man had been at the front of the car doing something. We probably couldn't even start it. We considered the possibility of escaping through the same route I had used to reach them. Beyond the highway and the gas station, there were only mountains. We were in a truly isolated location, where it was common to encounter animals, and people didn't venture there without good reason. Nonetheless, I was certain I would rather take my chances in the mountains than stay there with those men. I hadn't seen the face of the first man, the one hiding in the bushes, but I had gotten a good look at the second, and I understood, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was someone capable of committing great acts of violence. I distinctly remember thinking that often, serial killers are visually unremarkable or blend in completely, but this man didn't. He couldn't go unnoticed, even if he tried. We were desperate when we saw a truck enter the gas station. What happened next was one of those moments where no words were needed for all of us to know what to do. We ran and signaled to the truck driver that we needed to get in quickly. He immediately understood what was happening and let us in without hesitation. When I looked towards the bushes, I saw the man stand up, wave at me, and just smile. It was a terrifying sight. As the truck drove off, the gravity of our situation hit us even harder. The cab was filled with an eerie silence, punctuated only by the rumble of the truck's engine. We glanced nervously out of the windows, half expecting to see those men following us. We didn't see them again. Clearly, whatever they wanted to do, they intended to do it in that area and had no interest in pursuing us along the highway. The next morning, the truck driver dropped us off at a police station where we reported everything that had happened. We later found out that some wires had been cut and the tires slashed. If I hadn't kept a cool head and acted on instinct, we don't know what would have happened that night. Even today, 17 years later, I never stop at night in deserted gas stations. Growing up, I always felt like an outsider. I didn't enjoy playing with other kids or being around them much. I preferred solitude, embarking on my own adventures and losing myself in countless books. This made me feel guilty. My parents never paid much attention to me, and I always felt like a disappointment to them for being such an introverted and solitary child. When I turned 18, I decided it was time to leave home. I could hardly wait to get my own place and finally be alone. I had been searching for rental homes for several months, but none had sparked my interest. Mostly, they were too expensive and lacked any appeal. One day, while wandering through the library, I stumbled upon a book about van life. I had never really considered that lifestyle for myself. In my area, you were only seen as a respectable and serious person if you followed the same monotonous path as everyone else. Grow up, get a job, marry, have children, and live the most mundane life possible. But I was used to reading a lot and always felt that my world was larger than other people's. I wanted to live adventures, to get out of there. That book promised exactly that. For an entire week, I was obsessed with that book. I read everything I could about the subject, watched countless YouTube videos, and finally, after a year, I hit the road. Looking back, those were glorious years. I explored various parts of the United States that many people only see in movies. And despite encountering many creeps along the way, nothing ever made me doubt that I had chosen the right lifestyle for me. Now, the story I'm about to tell you happened during one of those weeks in 2017. It was mid-August, and the weather was perfect for parking the van near the coast. At that time, I was in Northwest Oregon, so I decided it was perfect to visit Cannon Beach. Despite the stunning view, it was packed with tourists, so I decided to keep driving and find a more secluded spot to spend the night. I had spent the previous 3 days walking around the area, so I was tired that day and decided to go to bed relatively early. I had just finished brushing my teeth when I heard a car approaching and stopping. I looked out the window and saw a black car pulling up right next to me. It was probably another person like me, tired of the crowds and looking for a hidden spot to spend the night. The only thing that made me a bit more suspicious was that we were in an open area with plenty of parking spots, yet they parked right next to me. However, I remember thinking that it could have been someone who felt safer around other people. Not everyone had to be like me. I had to do one last round, close everything, and go to bed. I felt uneasy, but decided to put my doubts aside and try to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. When you spend too much time on the road and around strangers, you develop an extra sense capable of detecting danger more quickly. I was pondering this when I heard the door of the car next to me open. Someone got out and started walking. But it wasn't a simple stroll. I could swear they were walking around the van. Everything was locked, as it always is, but I still felt vulnerable. The van wasn't that secure if someone decided to break in. In a normal situation, and as had happened before, what you should do is remain as still and quiet as possible. The last thing you want is to let anyone know that there are people inside the van. But whoever was outside knew I was there too. One of the windows was still open when they arrived. Then I had an idea. I called one of my childhood friends, actually one of the very few I had, explained the situation, and put him on speaker. I wanted to give the impression that I wasn't alone, that there were two men inside the van. If someone was planning to rob me, maybe they would think twice, considering it would be more difficult to rob two people instead of one. After hanging up, I stayed silent, waiting to hear something more. But for long minutes, there was nothing. I felt a sense of relief, thinking that whatever they had intended, they had given up. Even so, I hadn't heard the car start up and leave, which meant whoever was out there hadn't left. That thought left me even more unsettled. You know that moment of silence just before something terrible happens? That was exactly what I felt. Then I heard something dragging. Was it metal scraping against the outside of the van? Like someone had jammed something metal into the van and was dragging it. That was the last straw. I quickly got up, gathered everything, and hit the road. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a person in a black hood standing next to a black car. I couldn't see the face. It was too dark, but I could tell it was a man. Afraid of being followed, I took a secondary road, making several turns and loops to throw him off. For over an hour, I continued this until I felt far enough and safe enough to stop again. This time, I parked in a place with people around me and movement. The next day, upon inspecting the van, I saw it was all scratched up, especially around the doors and windows. That man had clearly tried to break in. I decided the best plan was to call the police and leave the area as soon as possible. It must have been around noon when I started feeling strange again, like I was being watched. The street was bustling with tourists, but even so, after the previous night, I felt vulnerable and exposed. I looked in the opposite direction and saw a man. Even from a great distance, I could tell without a doubt he was looking at me. There was no way to know if it was the same person. I hadn't seen his face the night before. But even if I had, this man was far enough away that I couldn't make out his features. Without thinking twice, I hit the road again. I drove for hours, making sure no one was following me. This time, I was certain. I had checked multiple times, and no one was tailing me. I had made enough turns to lose anyone trying to follow. Feeling a bit more at ease, I considered letting go of the events from the previous night. I figured I could repair the van, or replace it entirely once I saved up some more money. Despite that, sleep was hard to come by, so I ended up watching 2 movies before finally drifting off. Suddenly, a loud bang jolted me awake. I instinctively looked at the door and all the windows. The clock read 4:33 a.m. What the hell was happening? It couldn't be a different intruder. It was too much of a coincidence to go years without anything major happening, only to have 2 consecutive nights of attempted break-ins. Likewise, it couldn't be the same person. How could they have found me? I was absolutely sure I hadn't been followed, and I was more than 5 hours away from the previous location. My thoughts were completely interrupted when I realized someone was actively trying to break into the van. Without thinking twice, adrenaline pumping through my veins, I jumped into the driver's seat and sped away as fast as I could. This time, I went straight to the police station and spent the night there. Later, I discovered that someone had placed a tracker on the underside of my van. That's how he found me. To this day, I don't know who the man was or what he wanted. One thing was clear. He wasn't trying to rob me. No one would go to such lengths to rob a second-hand van that obviously needed replacing. I don't know what he wanted, and I try not to think about it too much.